Hey you guys, I hope you're all doing well. Thanks so much for being here. I'm really excited to share this new asset with you all. It's an animated foam material that can be used for a wide variety of things, such as ocean suds, beer foam, soap, latte froth, carbonated beverages, boiling liquids, and even abstract or alien-like materials. These are ultra-detailed 4K animated displacement maps that are seamlessly tileable. They come in 3 different speeds depending on what material you're building, and each image sequence has 1,000 frames, so no matter which speed you choose, you'll have 1,000 frames to work with. All 3 image sequences come in 32-bit EXR, so you'll be able to get great results for those ultra close-up shots. All the examples you're seeing on screen were built using Cinema 4D and Octane Render, but if you're not a Cinema 4D user, if you're not an Octane user, you can still fully utilize these texture maps in your application of choice for both stills and animation, as long as your application supports image sequences. So I just want to give you guys a quick run through of how to set this material up, give you some general guidance and tips, and help you avoid some of the gotchas you may encounter along the way. But first, I want to give you some quick info on the download files. We have 2 main folders here containing the texture maps and also some Cinema 4D example scenes that you can check out as well. Here inside our texture maps, we have a folder containing 3 separate image sequences for our various speeds. Now, each of these 1,000 frame sequences comes packaged in a 30 gigabyte zip file, which is quite large. So if you're limited on disk space, I'd highly recommend not downloading everything at once and just download them as needed. And lastly, all these example scenes are compatible with Cinema 4D version R20 and above, and also Octane Render version 2020 and above. Alright, so we're going to jump into a new Cinema 4D scene where I already have my Octane Live Viewer launched and just an empty plane here for us to build our material on. So let's add a new Octane material. Let's drag it onto our plane and open our material settings to start adding some parameters. So I'm going to change this to a glossy material and add a kind of vibrant color to a nice red, make it a little more reflective. Then we're going to come in and add a new displacement. And we're going to load in a Octane image texture. So let's go in and navigate to our folder where we have our image sequence saved. Here we have our 32-bit EXR files. I'm going to click on this first one and load it in. And it's going to ask me if I want to relocate these files, which I do not want to do, simply because the files are quite large and it would take forever to do so. So it's probably good practice to have these saved in a designated folder that you can link to when you're starting a new project. So now we're going to go to the animation tab. We're going to hit calculate and our number is going to jump to our 1,000 frames here. So now we've got our full animation loaded in here, ready to go. Let's back out to our displacement settings and let's zoom in here to see what's going on. And the first thing that we're going to notice is that the resolution is absolutely atrocious, and that is because by default this level of detail is set quite low. So we're going to go ahead and increase the resolution here. We're technically working with a 4K file, but I like to cheat this a little bit and make this 8K, and what actually is going to happen is it's going to sort of interpolate that 4K file and give us a slightly smoother result. So let's increase our height here so we can really see all those bubbles popping through. And so now at this point, after just loading in one texture map, we've got a pretty detailed, interesting result here. And if we zoom in, we're really starting to see the benefits of using a 32-bit displacement map, because we can zoom in quite close and this displacement will stay pretty smooth. However, if we keep pushing in and keep pushing in further, we will reach a point where we'll start to see some of these artifacts and natural kind of noise poking through, and we can fix that pretty easily just by coming down to the filter type here, change this to box, and just increase this a few percentages, and it'll smooth that out, no problem. If for some reason you need to get this close up to the material, you can still retain that ultra smooth look. So let's zoom back out, and the next thing I want to show you is a way to repurpose this texture map and use it as a mask so you can kind of blend between multiple colors and even multiple materials. So let me show you what I mean by that. We're going to go to the Diffuse tab. We're going to load in a mix texture and a few RGB spectrums. So just going to do something with a lot of contrast here. I'm going to bring back that red. And in the amount parameter up here, we're going to load in our texture map. So let me go back to displacement and just copy this map. Come back to our mix material, and we're going to drop this in here. And immediately nothing is really happening because with the EXR file, the color values are so spread out that we need more contrast to really see some of these colors revealed. So what we're going to want to do is throw this into a gradient. If we open this up, right now my slider is pretty zoomed in here, so I'm going to zoom this out. We're going to see a slider here, and what we're going to do is sort of crunch the luminance values of our texture map to kind of make those colors pop through. So I'm going to take this slider and I'm going to drag it all the way to the left, and we're going to start seeing some of that red pop through. If I hover my cursor over one of these knots, hold down Alt, right click, and drag, I can kind of zoom in and get more space here. So I'm going to kind of tighten these values a bit. The goal is to kind of just isolate the bubbles so that they have their own color and the spaces in between have a different color. So I'm just going to kind of tighten these up a bit. Have a nice little fall off on some of these smaller ones, which looks pretty nice. All right. Yeah, so that's working pretty well. All right, so I'm actually going to go back and I'm going to swap out this red for a Cinema 4D noise. And I'm going to input some new colors. Let's do purple and green. Sort of clip these values a little bit. And if we start playing around with the scale, we'll start to create kind of this illusion that each individual bubble is being assigned its own unique color. So it's a really quick and effective way to create some nice color variation over your material. We can actually go back to the gradient slider and use our slider here to control the opacity of the colors. So right now, this knot here is revealing 100% of this color that's coming through. So if we lower this value to 80%, we'll start to blend that color with the one beneath it. So this will become very handy when we start using it on a mixed material and then sort of blending the specular material for our bubbles with the kind of foamy material in between. So I'm just going to go back and make this red again. I'm just going to touch on one last thing before we start building our foam texture. Let's come to our tag here, and we can see that our tiling is currently at 100% scale. Whenever you change this value, you're going to have to make some adjustments in your displacement settings. So let me show you what I mean. This material is completely seamless, so you can shrink it down and you'll have no hard edges, no seams. So let's get this down to 50%. And we see we're packing a lot of detail in here. There's a lot of little spheres in this space now, and it's still handling it very well. But now our displacement map looks pretty stretched because of our scale change. So what we're going to want to do is go back into our displacement settings and sort of adjust the height accordingly. So let's cut this value roughly in half. And now we're kind of back at something more appropriate for this scale. Great, so let's move on and take sort of the principles of what I've just done here and apply it to a foam material. Here's a nice close-up of a foam texture I created using this technique. And yeah, really, again, at the end of the day, it's the micro detail that really sells this effect, you know, kind of giving the illusion that there really could be, you know, hundreds of thousands of little spheres packed into this whole area, right? Each of these little bubbles has its own little specular highlight from the sun, which really creates a lot of complexity in these areas. This mesh is really just a deformed and melted sphere that's intersecting with a plane. But this intersection kind of creates an interesting thing along the edges. It kind of makes it look like these individual bubbles are kind of just clinging to the surface a bit. So it's a cool effect that you can make just using the shader. So let's go ahead and try to recreate this material. So I'm just going to delete it quick from the mesh. Let's create a new Octane mix material. All right, and then we're going to create two just regular materials. And one of these I'm going to be naming Bubbles. The other one I'm going to name Foam. I mean, it's technically all foam, but so let's open up the Bubbles material. Let's make this a specular material. And I think first thing, there's not a whole lot to this one, honestly. Really, it's just a little touch of dispersion. You really don't need much at all, because you really start to see it scatter throughout the object. So that's really all I'm going to do to this one at the moment. We'll probably come back to it. Let's jump into the foam. And here we're going to make this one this is going to be sort of our subsurface scattery type of material. So let's go to the medium, and I've been really digging the random walk lately, so let's grab that. We're going to make this white. We're going to lower the density a bit, and then this again is just going to kind of correlate to the size of your scene, the size of your mesh. So that's what I mean when I say you got to kind of tailor these things, change these things to accommodate your scene. So I'm going to lower this down to around 20. I know this radius will be just up a little bit. And then an important thing about this one is we're going to check this parameter. It's fake shadows. I know we're not seeing any. Let's get some feedback going on in the viewport because it's not really helping much. Apologize about that. All right, let's get this on our sphere here. It's just kind of this, yeah, so we're already getting just this kind of soapy material. It's kind of soapy without the bubbles at the moment, right? With mixed materials, you actually have to apply the displacement map to the mixed material itself, so we're not going to be putting it in either of these. So let's go to displacement. We're going to add a new displacement like we did before. Image texture. Going to load those maps in again. Calculate. Then we'll bump up the resolution again. Let's do ooh, it's going to be a bit high, isn't it? Alright, so we might need to use this mid-level here to kind of sink it down beneath the surface a little bit. Yeah, there we go. And we can probably make this a lot smaller. And I think this mesh is flat enough where I wasn't using UV mapping before because it kind of distorts the mesh a bit on the sides just because I just have a displaced sphere. So I'm just going to use cubic mapping for this case. And then I'm going to scale it down to 50% just to get some more bubbles packed in there. We might even have to go smaller. We'll see. All right, so the next thing that we should get working while we're thinking of it is we're going to set up that similar type of mask situation with the gradient. So I'm going to go to our mix material. This is very similar to what we had before. We're going to use this parameter, and we're going to paste our texture map in there to sort of blend between these two materials. So let's grab our texture map and let's paste it in here. And then we're going to throw that inside of a gradient and kind of repeat the same process as before. Kind of take these sliders and crunch them close together. Bring this one way to the left. Starting to see a few bubbles pop through there. Let's zoom in to this again. Tighten these together a bit. And so right now we're getting kind of an incorrect look, because what's happening is we're setting up the material correctly, but right now we're seeing through each of these bubbles, and we're seeing through directly to the floor, which makes it seem like there's no volume beneath the surface, because we're able to see right through it, right? So this again is where sort of blending these materials with these swatches come in handy. So I'm gonna open this up, and I'm going to change the value to something like, let's try 80. And now we're kind of blending that pure specular material with the foam, and so we're kind of seeing that through each of these bubbles, so it feels like there's more foam beneath the surface. Tighten that in a little bit. All right, and then we're going to go back to our foam material. Let's give this just also a little touch of dispersion, and we're going to increase the roughness a bit too, and this is going to kind of make it feel a bit thicker as well. So already that really helps make everything look a lot more wet. It's giving some nice scattering through these negative areas. The bubbles are all receiving some nice color influence from it all. So that's not looking bad. I think we're pretty close to there. It's not super complicated. It's fairly straightforward. But again, it's like your lighting does so much for this material. So, if you load in all these parameters and something is still looking off, it's usually just a matter of like redirecting your light from a flattering angle, making sure there's enough contrast between this material and the background. It's good to work with some darker background colors for these bubbles to absorb. If you put this material on a light surface, these bubbles aren't able to reflect any color, so you're not going to see sort of these darker tones in the bubbles. So the light and the other objects in your scene really have an influence on how this is going to turn out. And I see my bloom is coming through a little heavy right now. I've got this ramped up a little bit as well. We can lower this, or we can increase the cutoff and kind of just isolate that bloom just kind of around the highlight areas, and it kind of helps along this sort of subsurface scattering feel.
So this can sometimes be a pretty render-intensive material, particularly with all the dispersion and scattering. So AI Denoiser is going to be your best friend here, so just make sure you have that enabled. Another thing you can do is scroll down to the hot pixel removal and clean up some of those fireflies that occasionally pop up in some areas as well. And then if I come up and open my render settings, another thing that's helpful is increasing the Caustic Blur a little bit. I believe it comes in at 0.01, so I've increased that a bit as well. And then you're going to want to enable static noise, and that'll help you prevent that noisy flickering that can happen when rendering out animations.
So I hope this has been helpful in getting you started. There are so many variations of this material that you can make, and I really encourage everyone to get creative and experiment with the texture maps. If you want to take a look at how I made some of those other materials, you can check out the example files I included and see how everything is set up. Thanks so much for joining me on this tutorial. I hope you find the texture maps useful, and I can't wait to see what you all create. See you guys soon.